Welcome, everyone. As you're joining, we'll give it just a little bit more time for everyone to hop in before we get started. Okay, well, I will go ahead and kick us off here. I want to start out by welcoming everyone. Thank you for taking some time to join this webinar today. We're really excited to have you all on here. And today's webinar is going to touch on a few things. We are really excited to highlight the key points from our report that we released last week on Powering the Future, what 50 years of enhanced geothermal teaches us today. And this webinar is specifically structured for Europe, for you all here. And just to give you a bit of an overview on what we'll be going through today, I will start out by giving some highlights of our new report on Powering the Future. I am Angela Seligman. I am Clean Air Task Force's senior geoscientist. And after I finish that overview, I will hand it off to my colleague Alessia Verone, who is our Government Affairs Director in Europe, also with Clean Air Task Force, and she will provide an overview on policies and regulations in Europe. And then we will hand it over to Tony Pink to give us some highlights across Europe on where the industry is going and some exciting points on for the future of geothermal across Europe. And Tony is with Pink Granite Consulting, and we pull him in a lot here at Clean Air Task Force. So to start by kicking us off, I'll give us an overview of our report, but first, just for those of you who are newer to geothermal, I want to start out by giving a bit of a background on what geothermal is and really how we pull the heat out of the ground. So when a lot of people think of geothermal energy, they typically think of what are conventional geothermal systems. This is what we see for most geothermal power plants today, and this is where we already have a lot of fluid underground that is able to cycle through. We typically think of these as hydrothermal systems. And because that fluid is already there and we already have cracks within the rock for the fluid to flow through, that allows us to just bring that hot fluid up to create power from these existing reservoirs in the ground. But sometimes we don't already have all of those pieces available in a given area. And this is where we have to utilize some form of next generation geothermal energy. And so that can either be enhanced geothermal systems, and those are an example of those are shown in the figure in the upper right of this slide, or closed loop geothermal systems. And an example of those is shown in the lower right portion of the slide here. So with enhanced geothermal systems, and this is what we dive into in our report that we just released last week, we might not have abundant fluid already in the ground, and we might not already have cracks or pathways for that fluid to flow through. So in these systems, these enhanced geothermal systems, also sometimes referred to as EGS, we have to create a reservoir underground so that we can bring water in, pump that water down, allow it to heat up using the heat from the earth, and then we can pull that hot fluid back up to the surface to be able to create power. Similarly, in closed loop geothermal systems, we also don't have all of those options available like in conventional geothermal systems, but instead of of creating a reservoir underground, we drill a series of pipes underground, and that creates a long series for the fluid to flow through. It's not in contact with the rock, but it can still pull heat in from the rock through that pipe that the fluid is flowing through, gather that heat, and come back up to the surface. And that is what is shown in the figure in the lower right portion of this slide. And so today we'll be discussing these enhanced geothermal systems. And now I want to dive into this report that we released last week. This is Powering the Future, What 50 Years of Enhanced Geothermal Teaches Us Today. And we were really lucky to find Jason Lipton to co-author this report with us. Jason is with Boulder Energy Advisory, and he led a lot of the legwork to be able to create this report. And this is built on a comprehensive database that we created of 103 historical and current enhanced geothermal systems projects from around the world. And within this, we used over 400 sources that included research reports, press releases, news articles, and personal contacts. And the really exciting piece of this report is that it really quantifies both the decades and incremental improvements, as well as the transformational advancements that are now driving hundreds of megawatts of enhanced geothermal systems projects under development, and really showing that these systems are no longer experimental, and we're already starting to see projects scaling. So with that, I'm going to take us through a highlight of quite a few of the graphs and figures that we have within this report. Some of them are a little more technical than others, but I promise with each one, I'll walk us through the figures and really showcase the high points and key aspects of each of the figures that we want to highlight. So this first one is showing the projects being built over time that are really showing an increase in project development since the early 1970s. And so in this figure, on the horizontal or the x-axis, we have the project year. These are each broken into chunks of 4 years. And then there are two different vertical or y-axis points on this plot here. So on the left side, we have the number of projects by continent per year, and these are each broken into the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Oceania. And then on the right vertical side, this is the cumulative count of projects. And so this is showing the increase over time up to those 103 enhanced geothermal systems projects since the 1970s. And additionally, we also see in this report that this totals over 165 wells with over 100 more in development today. And we're also seeing both gradual and step change improvements. And this is including significant innovation in technology in terms of horizontal drilling and drill bits, in terms of the techniques that are being used for both drilling and stimulation methods, as well as the financials. And we'll get into this a bit more throughout this presentation. This is in terms of drilling costs and scalability. And before we go into the next slide, I want to really just highlight that this increase in projects that we're seeing in the early 2000s that includes a lot of increase in projects even across Europe. You can see this is the dark purple portion of the bar showing a lot of really exciting project developments in Europe. So this next slide is looking at drilling speeds and the really great improvements that we're seeing in terms of drilling rates. This is typically thought of in ROP, or rates of penetration. And this is shown on the vertical or y-axis on this plot. We have ROP, or again, rates of penetration in meters per year on the vertical axis. And then on the horizontal axis, this is looking at the drilling year for each of the project. And on a lot of these slides moving forward, we'll have some sort of of kind of baseline or threshold line that is used in the figure. In this one, we're looking at the well cost simplified threshold. This is a threshold of 9.4 meters per hour. This is from previous research and is for each of these, this is really being used as kind of a goal or a baseline for comparison. And so the key point in this figure is that early on, we really weren't seeing projects with rates of penetration over 5 meters per hour. And this is really until now, where we're starting to see projects with drilling rates above this threshold and getting all the way up to the Utah Forge point is at 31 meters per hour, and the Cape Station one is up to 29 meters per hour. This is the maximum average rate of penetration from this is Fervo Energy's Sugarloaf appraisal well. So we're really starting to see some great improvements in the rates of penetration for these projects. And the really key piece for improvements in drilling rates is that we want to get those costs down. Of course, the drilling costs are based on more things than just the rate of penetration, but seeing increases in rates of penetration will help us to lower the drilling cost. And so this next figure here is looking at drilling costs overall for projects. If we look at this on the horizontal axis, this is the measured depth in meters. And then on the vertical axis, this is the estimated drilling cost per well. And again, we have these comparison lines. These are 3 different scenarios that are from, again, from previous research where we have the base scenario, the intermediate scenario, and then the ideal scenario. And what we can see here is that there are a lot of projects. A lot of these are historical projects that have a higher estimated drilling cost per well above that base scenario. I know time is not shown on here, but we are seeing projects getting closer to that ideal scenario. One example is these Cape Station points. This is from Fervo Energy's Utah project, but also from the Soultz points here. This is in France, where we have projects that are below that base scenario, starting to get closer to that ideal scenario. And I know that we don't have time shown on this plot specifically, but the report does note that from around 2021, we had averages of $10 to $20 million per 4 to 5 kilometer well. But then we're starting to see averages in 2023 go all the way down to around 4.6 million US dollars. And so this is showing a really great improvement in these drilling costs. So this next slide here is looking at production temperatures. And so this is showing that we're getting to hotter production temperatures over time. So this plot is project year on the horizontal axis. This is going from 1975 up to the planned projects past 2025. And then project temperature, this is in degrees Celsius on the vertical or the y-axis. And again, we have this kind of comparison line. This is at 200 degrees Celsius. This is from MIT's 2006 report. And so what we can see in this figure here is that we are getting to higher production temperatures over time. The average before the year 2000 is just over 100 degrees Celsius. And then after 2000, we're looking at an average of just over 153 degrees Celsius. Of course, we like to point out with this figure and then with the next one as well, is that these projects, of course, have a really large variability depending on what the project is being used for in terms of power production versus direct heat. The local geology has a lot to play into this as well. And so using these overall in terms of an overall average is a little bit difficult. but we are still, even with that, seeing an overall increase in production temperature over time. So this next figure here is looking at the length of these wells. So I know this figure is structured a little bit differently. We're looking at well, this is measured well depth on the horizontal axis. This is put on the top of the plot here because we're looking underground in this one. So this is why we have the well measured depth in negative numbers going down on the vertical axis. But then on the horizontal axis that we put on the top, this is the drilling or completion year of the project. And so just for a bit of background, the well measured depth is looking at the total length of the well. And so this includes both the depth below the ground, but then if they end up having some horizontal drilling in the well, that is included in this well measured depth. And so the key, we also pointed out a couple of the projects that get to greater than 6,000 meters for the well measured depth. This is a project in Finland, as well as a project in France from 2017. And what we really want to point out here is that this average measured well depth is more than 2 times the project averages in the last 5 years relative to the 1970s and the 1980s. And so this is showing a really big improvement in how long we're able to drill these wells. So this next plot here, and I promise this is the last of the slightly more technical ones that I have for this presentation. This one is looking at production flow rates. So on the horizontal axis, we have project year. And then on the vertical axis or the y-axis, we're looking at production flow rate. This is in liters per second. And again, we have a benchmark or comparison value on this plot as well. And what's really important to note from this figure is that we are seeing the trend increasing, but we still don't have all that many projects that have exceeded that 80 liters per second benchmark that we have that we're aiming for in this figure. We do have a few projects that are past that 2025 mark. And with these are projects in development, but the points are based on testing or expected rates. And we do see that, like in the Haute-Sorn project in Switzerland, we're starting to get to at least planned points beyond that 80 liters per second mark. And we, of course, still have, you can see a few of those projects over time that have had flow rates above that 80 liters per second mark. But this is one of those areas that could still use some improvement, and we hope to see continued improvement like we do for these overall averages over time. So this is the last figure that I'll show. It's one of my favorites from the report. I know there's a lot of points on here. Each of these are their own individual projects. And what we're looking at is on the horizontal axis, we have the primary purpose of the project. This goes from early stage field research on the left side up to full-scale deployment on the right side. And then on the vertical axis, we're looking at project year. And the key point that I want to make from this figure is that as you may expect early on in the 1970s, 1980s, we see a lot more projects in that field research space. But over time, we're starting to trend towards more projects that are in pilot demonstration to more projects in commercial demonstration, and then to that full-scale deployment point on the far upper right portion of the figure. And so this is really showing the progress that we're seeing over time. But of course, we are not all the way there, and to really unlock the full potential of next generation geothermal and enhanced geothermal systems, we still need more improvements in the technical, market, and policy advances categories. And so I'll take us through these kind of one by one before I hand it off to my colleagues. The first one is in the technology and operations category. One is in co-production opportunities that can really help to bring down the cost of these projects, because these projects do have a high upfront cost initially. And some of these are in direct use or providing thermal heating or mineral cogeneration, such as lithium, as well as the potential for carbon sequestration and thermal energy storage in these projects. Additionally, there's more work to be done on longevity and reservoir decline management. And this is the real piece here is just getting projects that have been operating for longer so that we can better understand how long these reservoirs can last before more wells need to be drilled to maintain that heat. The next group is in market and recognition. One of these is really being able to recognize the full value of enhanced geothermal systems. And this is in the ability to provide electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a year, and reliable base load electricity and clean, firm power in terms of clean energy that is available all day, every day, and with advancements can be available anywhere. And with that also gets to the need for more geographic expansion and being able to have these projects, even in regions where we don't have heat available at such a shallow depth, so that we can really have these projects, even in regions where you have to drill deeper to get to your heat source. And additionally, we have more needs in improving data transparency and standardization. This really gets to the ability for multiple project developers to not make the same mistake. So if they can learn from the mistakes of other project developers, then we don't have to have repeat mistakes across companies or regions. And then the last category is in policy and investment. And this gets to the need for increased commercial and research investment into the technology, as well as more policy and regulatory support for the industry. And with that, I think that is the perfect transition for me to hand it over to my colleague, Alessia, who will take us through an overview of how policies and regulations will impact the future of next generation geothermal across Europe. Alessia, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Angela. I do not have slides as I'm not expecting to showcase graph, but don't hesitate if there is any question. So I'm going to move the discussion slightly towards policy, because policy can create massive barrier or being a massive support for technology like this one who are on the brink of deployment but need a little bit more push if we want them to commercialize and play the role that they're supposed to play in the decarbonization. So I'm going to very much focus on the EU policy because that is the focus of today's webinar. Geothermal can be a real contributor in the triple challenge that the EU is currently facing. In terms of energy security, this can be something that we produce inside the EU, and the potential is extremely high. If we consider that 1% of Europe's high heat temperature from the geothermal could provide the electricity for the equivalent of 1,400 cities of the size of Berlin. It is really a lot of energy that could be produced locally if we are able to achieve the deployment that would be needed. It's also quite important for competitiveness. As was mentioned before, the cost can be driven down quite fast and could then provide a cost competitive energy source. And it is obviously very relevant for decarbonization goal, as we are struggling to find as much clean energy as possible to meet our decarbonization objective. So geothermal is very much matching the EU goal and current agenda, but yet if we look at the past legislative term, we see that geothermal has not been part of the most prominent topic, and that even if we see a lot of projects kicking off in Europe, we are still way behind where we would need to be if we really want to capitalize on that potential. So looking at what has been done, so first looking back before looking forward, during the legislative term in the Green Deal, geothermal was present, but it was not as prioritized and put on the same political level as other technology. So if we compare, for example, geothermal with wind or hydrogen or solar, geothermal definitely received less attention. It was mentioned in some legislation opening the door for more to be done there, but it did not receive the same kind of dedicated focus that other technology receive. That being said, we still saw some key progress in the last legislative term. We've seen Horizon Europe supporting key projects, looking at how to share data and how to create shared knowledge in this geothermal industry side. We've seen the Innovation Fund funding key projects, for example, the Everloop one, who is really looking at closed loop, no fracture geothermal system. So you do have a little bit of funding that went to improve the geothermal and innovation in the EU. If you look at more the regulatory side, we've seen a lot of progress being done after Ukraine's invasion, when the importance of geothermal for producing local energy was kind of increasing. And so after that, we've seen, for example, that the three key institutions suddenly paid more attention to this key technology. So we've seen the Parliament, for example, adopting its own initiative report that was calling for faster geothermal deployment, for better finances, for permitting measure, and for improved geological mapping. We've seen the Council of the EU also following up with its own conclusion. It was kind of providing very similar recommendation and stressing the role of enhanced and advanced geothermal and what they can play for our energy system. And we've seen the Commission also, for example, adding geothermal in the Net Zero Industry Act, making sure that it is considered as one of the strategic net zero technology, and launching, for example, under the set plant, a geothermal implementation working group. So we do see that there has been progress at the EU level, and we do hope that it will continue during this term, and I will go back to that. First, I also want to flag that we're talking a lot about the EU, especially in Brussels where I'm based, but we need to keep in mind that a lot of the progress on the policy side also need to come from the member state. And on that, we have seen some member states making quite a lot of progress, but there are the minority. If you look at the NECP, very few countries in Europe are actively considering geothermal, and even less are going beyond conventional geothermal to also include the enhanced one. So if you look now at this legislative term and at the Clean Industrial Deal, a lot of it could be extremely relevant for the geothermal sector when we're discussing state aid, permitting, de-risking key projects and skills. All of this is extremely important for the deployment of the geothermal sector in the EU. The Commission has announced an action plan on geothermal for next year, and that will be a key opportunity to really move forward geothermal and going beyond conventional geothermal to also include the more innovative form that can produce energy and beyond than heating and cooling. So if we look then at the current state, geothermal was included, but not at the same level. So now looking at the different barriers that we are hoping the policy could address during this term, the first one, without any surprise, is going to be funding. So when we ask industry what they see as the main challenge for the deployment of the project, funding is mentioned first for 2/3 of them. So this is definitely something that is extremely important if we want this project to go ahead. EGS tend to be quite expensive, so the upfront cost for drilling and exploration, we are counting like up to 10 or more million euro, and so that is a massive investment, but they are taking quite a lot of risk, because obviously with the limited data that we have on the ground and the return on the well, there is a large part of unknown when they are making that investment, and that is where additional policy may be welcome. When we look at other technology like solar, wind, and hydrogen, they do have dedicated scheme, and so that is definitely something that could be considered. Another point that has proved challenging is the permitting process, which does remain fragmented and inconsistent across different member states. So the geothermal technology can find themselves in a bit of a gray zone in some countries because it can be regulated under main mining, energy, environmental legislation. And so some projects have to go through quite a lot of different authority just to get past the permitting stage. For example, in France, they have up to 4 of them. So permitting does remain a challenge, even though with the NCIA this could have been addressed. So this is also worth flagging. Another point to flag is the lack of EU long-term political commitment. So if we look at many technology, we do have target, we do have a direction, and that is something that has been lacking at the EU level for geothermal, a clear indication both to the member state and to the industry that geothermal is a technology that will be part of the energy mix of the EU in the long term, in part of the policy framework, and that will look beyond conventional geothermal, but also towards enhanced geothermal or closed loop one. Another point to mention is related to public acceptance. So geothermal energy can raise concern, and so it's also important to make sure that you are addressing them early on, that you are making an effort, a concert and comprehensive effort to communicate about these different projects, to raise awareness about the risk that they bring, about the benefit that they would bring to the community, to make sure that you have the buy-in of the citizens before you're starting your project. So looking at all these kind of barriers, I want to flag that a lot of the barrier that EGS currently are facing are more related to policy than technical parts. So you definitely need some technical progress happening, but policy can really hold back the EGS deployment if we don't address it in a timely way. And so looking at what should be happening at the policy level, the first one point is very much related to supporting field test and pilot projects in different EU countries. So ideally, by 2030 and 35, the EU should fund several new geothermal demonstration projects, looking at different kinds of technology, making sure that we are reaching a critical number that we can really learn from. Like other technology, a broad political direction with targets and goal in terms of energy production would also be very helpful to provide a long-term direction of where we want this technology to go. And it would be also useful to have very clear direction on what kind of testing will be done in terms of like drilling method, underground reservoir creation, material that can handle very high heat. There are a lot of specific technological aspects that would benefit for higher attention. So this is very much connected to the need for more research being done on high-level geothermal technology to make sure that we are also advancing that aspect and that we are developing the technology that would help us maximize the energy we can get from a single well. In terms of finance, making sure that we are setting up a special risk-sharing facility for next-generation geothermal would very much be needed at the EU level. And this could combine grants and loans for early-stage projects and include insurance or guarantee, potentially managed by the European Investment Bank to cover different risks like drilling failure. The idea would be to attract private capital, and so to make sure that we are shifting as soon as possible from public support to private funding. Permitting, as mentioned, is still unfortunately an issue, and so making sure that we are actually implementing properly the Net Zero Industry Act, that geothermal projects do benefit from simplified permitting, one-stop shop, digital procedure, and that they are indeed part of the strategic project would be very important. And then a last point to mention is the creation of a EU geothermal data platform. So as was mentioned before, making sure that we have the data that exist in terms of what is under the ground, but also that we are sharing the lessons learned from different projects so that we don't repeat the same mistake across projects, but on the contrary, that we are actually learning from them and speeding up the deployment of this technology going forward. I think that the key message I really want to stress is that EGS represents a massive potential, and by addressing the current political obstacle and making sure our policy are shaped in the best way to support that technology, we could really support the deployment of a technology that is key for almost all our goals currently in the EU. So that is it from my side, and I'm giving the floor to Tony. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessia. And Tony, I will hand it over to you to go through some updates on the industry and its state across Europe. Take it away.
Well, thank you ever so much, both Angela and Alessia. I'm going to take what Angela showed you and kind of try and put a European spin onto that, so that the people online understand what the story that the Clean Air Task Force have uncovered, and how that can have a fantastic positive impact on Europe and globally on the potential for EGS. And then, it was great to listen to Alessia. Lots of the challenges that us geothermal operators have in Europe really do come from the what we hear so often is, oh, what's geothermal? Or we don't hear politicians even use the G word, and everything is about wind and solar and nuclear, and really, we have an opportunity. This technology is not new. To develop our industry across the continent. So let's talk about a couple of the points that Angela showed you. So the first thing, thinking about EGS in general. So we're talking about firstly a term that is called reservoir independent. What reservoir independent means is that we pick a spot in the earth that has no natural fractures, no permeability, no hydrothermal fluid, and we drill a pair of wells, and then we stimulate between the two of those wells and create an artificial reservoir. That is reservoir independent, and that is what we the term EGS, reservoir independent well. The other types of EGS wells are reservoir dependent. That's where we had a sedimentary aquifer, but we're improving the performance of that sedimentary aquifer, or we have a hydrothermal geothermal asset, and we're improving its performance by stimulating the production in that well. So if we take that as the holistic project landscape, and then let's look at what are the key findings out of this report and how does this impact Europe. So the first one, which is one that's very dear to my heart because I was involved in the Forge project and some recent work in Western United States, is the impact of drill bit technology on driving down the cost of European projects. So the impact of the rate of penetration that we've seen going from a background level of 10 meters an hour to now 25, 30 meters an hour means that these fantastic drill bits are delivering performance globally that can knock down as much as knock your project down to a third of its cost from 5 years ago. So that is not unique to any geographical location or any project design. That's just driving down the cost. So, instantly Europe is inheriting that global learning. And a recent Horizon bid that I was involved in is looking at multiple. There's actually multiple Horizon bids that the European Union are funding, potentially, if those projects win, some really good advances in drilling technology. We see that projects are getting hotter. Now, the projects are getting hotter partly because of the first bullet. Because we can now go deeper, cheaper, we can now get down to formations even with relatively benign temperature gradients. So if you look at a European example, if you look at the Eden project, which was funded by the European Union during COVID, and is now delivering clean geothermal heat to the biospheres in Cornwall. That location and that geology there, we can, for the same cost of the original well, exploit wells that are 3 times deeper or 3 times hotter than the original well, or go down to a similar depth for a third of the price. So if you look at the potential in Cornwall, in northeast England, in some of the other hot granites and basement rock around Europe, we have an opportunity to drive these wells down into the electricity production zone that we want to see. Higher flow rates. So lots and lots of EGS wells now. The stimulation process is really getting much more advanced, and lots of lessons learned from originally from oil and gas that have transferred into geothermal, meaning that we're getting up to those 80 liter a second flow rates. So we have the ability to produce these wells, produce a much greater volume of heat energy coming out the wellbore, or create electricity as well. One of the really cool opportunities in Europe is the opportunities that come with additional revenue streams. So, you know, if you look at really the low-hanging fruit in Europe is actually heat. Yeah, we're a relatively cold continent. We have very cold winters. We have a massive need for heat. We have lots of projects developing across UK, Germany, France, Holland, where heat is a massive opportunity for our industry. But when that heat can be part of an electricity project that is cascading heat, so we use the heat to improve the performance of our electricity project, and then even further down the road we extract valuable minerals, lithium or rare earths out of those fluids. And then the last key finding from the report really was this upsurge in power purchase agreements, which is, you know, this is the big lever that helps us, and what we're starting to see globally, and the impact on this for sure is going to be massive in Europe, is the large data center providers do not want to become or have massive negativity against them for their increase in energy use. So geothermal is really the best energy source to provide both cooling and electricity to those large data centers. So as a continent, we really need to look at putting those data centers in the geothermal locations, and then using that cascading energy source of electricity, heat, and potentially minerals to power those data centers. Yeah. So that's the key findings that were driven out of the report, which I think are extremely useful for our continent. But let's have a look at, you know, the potential in the continent. You know, we have in UK we have lots of heat opportunities in the sedimentary aquifers. Can we enhance the performance of those sedimentary aquifers and produce a lot more flow out of them and a lot more thermal energy by doing an EGS style well? We have great opportunities and funding going on in Germany for both EGS and for closed loop, which Angela touched on. Iceland is part of the continent, and obviously they are now looking at how can they take their obviously extremely high thermal gradient that they have, but make it almost ubiquitous across the whole country. and how can they use that energy for the good of others. But now let's look at challenges outside of what Alessia highlighted in policy and planning and things. You know, the first one, the elephant in the room, is fracking or hydraulic stimulation. So I've had a lot of experience in hydraulic stimulation. And what we really need to do as a continent is start to do some really good R&D, do some hydraulically stimulated projects, but do them in a very safe and scientifically based way. You know, we really need to do this in a way that, and we really involve the public and involve the stakeholders and make everyone feel comfortable that hydraulic stimulation for the good of mankind to unleash the clean energy that we can provide from our planet is really a very positive thing. And it's interesting, in early discussions colleagues of mine have had with the large green organizations, you know, like Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace. They're extremely positive to hydraulic stimulation for preventing climate change. So I think we need to, as a continent, start to think about how we're going to do hydraulic stimulation at a continental level, and understand that for geothermal, it could be a massive upside for the continent. The investment side of things and the governmental sort of fear that you know, we can't do what's guaranteed for geothermal. I think this is utter rubbish. Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the simple maths, that the overrun on a recent massive nuclear project, that could have that overrun, not the cost of the project, the overrun, the overcosts, would have delivered potentially 2.5 gigawatts of geothermal energy, and we would have drilled 2,500 wells and employed 5 to 10,000 people in that process. You know, so thinking about the risks of geothermal, because we need a exploration well that's going to cost us £2 million up front, is ridiculous when we're spending 23 billion extra on a nuclear project. And then one of the biggest blockers that we see and the challenges across the continent is these exploration wells. And you know, it's really uplifting to see the Dutch have put a program of exploration wells into the continent for the purposes of understanding the geothermal landscape under the country. You know, if we do a relatively small number of exploration wells focused for geothermal, those wells are not wells that are required for a single project. They can really unleash a whole basin. Yeah. So the reduction in risk from one exploration well in a sedimentary basin, confirming the temperature, confirming the depth of the rocks with high porosity and permeability, can de-risk 10 to 100 projects around that exploration well. So for the small investment of a couple of million euros on an exploration well to confirm a whole basin, I think this is money well spent for the continent. So the story, in summation, is we have a massive opportunity in Europe to ruthlessly steal everything that's been learned around the globe, deploy that on our continent, and accelerate the geothermal industry to really superpower our economies and reduce our carbon footprint and deliver clean green energy to our continent over the next decade. So thank you very much for joining this webinar, and we'll open it up to questions from the floor.
Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you, Alessia, as well. I will move us over to our Q&A. We do have a couple of questions already in the chat. I will stop sharing my screen here so that I can see the Q&A in the chat a little bit better on my end. And and I'll move us over into the Q&A portion of this webinar. If you do have more questions, feel free to enter them in. There is a chat feature, but there is also a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen where you can enter in any questions that you have. I will go ahead and start by kicking us off with one of the questions that was entered in um, when during registration, and that one is about R&D, our research and development. And Tony, I will go ahead and hand this over to you. The question was on what is the main focus that is needed for research and development to really kick off this industry and really help us to scale and lower the cost for enhanced geothermal systems. Tony, I'll
Sure.
hand that over to you.
Yeah, Angela, I think it's twofold. I think it's R&D from a geological research of our continent. So doing those exploration wells that could de-risk the whole continent's geothermal portfolio. So that's the R&D into the deep geology of our continent. The second aspect of it, I think, is in the technology. But I think on the technology side, there are challenges, but I think Europe is already taking that head on. If I look through the impact of horizon projects on geothermal, those have been very impactful in the past, and the recent round looks really promising for accelerating our industry. But another little challenge that's out there is we do lack labs to test a lot of this technology. Yeah. So, some of the unique drilling methodologies really need some advanced laboratories. So it's high temperature, high pressure environment, and that kit is lacking globally, and it's not unique to Europe. The US is lacking labs for testing a lot of those things that would really accelerate this industry. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. And I will just with the discussion on the labs and the research aspect, I am going to just throw out a very shameless plug for a knowledge center that Clean Air Task Force is currently working to develop. This is a knowledge center and database that we are compiling to really be a one-stop shop, single place to house um, just really the capabilities in research groups and laboratories around the world. And it's specifically focused for getting to commercialization of more high temperature geothermal systems. And if you would like to be included in this database, we have a survey that you can fill out, and feel free to email and reach out to Clean Air Task Force, and we will share that survey with you. Just wanted to throw out that shameless plug really quickly, but I will move us back over to the Q&A. There is a question on the reduction in costs for enhanced geothermal systems and how these cost reductions can translate internationally and also to drilling for conventional geothermal systems. I will go ahead and start by giving a bit of answer to this one, and then Tony, I'd love to hand it over to you afterwards if there's anything that you
Sure.
want to add. Really, the great thing about reducing costs for enhanced geothermal systems, or really also closed loop geothermal systems or conventional geothermal systems, is that the learnings for each of these can translate into any region and to any of these technologies. So getting better at drilling for enhanced geothermal systems helps us to drill more less in a less costly way for conventional geothermal systems as well as closed loop geothermal systems, and learning to drill into deeper and hotter temperatures for one of these really helps us across the board. But Tony, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, what is going on in Iceland? And some of this is driven by the Clean Air Task Force bringing this global ecosystem together. Is from Iceland, New Zealand, United States, Japan. Those of us working at the very extreme end of the geothermal spectrum in super hot rock EGS. So that is us drilling down to heading towards between 300 and 400 degrees C, and then fracturing that rock. The costs in those projects, from improved fracture capability, rapid increases in ROP, driving those costs down. We are moving down in the levelized cost of electricity down the totem pole really fast. Yeah. And if you say at the stage we're at, and you take us to the nth of a kind type wells, those wells are going to be the cheapest renewable energy on the planet. And we just need to we need help to make that journey. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I think we have time for one or two more questions. And Tony, I'm going to throw one of these out to you on what you referred to as the elephant in the room in your conversation earlier. And that is around it's around the induced seismicity, or these small earthquakes that are created in these enhanced geothermal systems projects, and the use of hydraulic fracturing and
Yeah, and
stimulation.
I
And
think
so,
I think would be nice to close this out is myself and Alicia together. So
great.
I'll throw it out there because she's got the opportunity to talk about what we have to do at a policy and a government level, but at a local level, it's about engagement of the people. It's about stakeholders, about getting out there and talking, and the one of the nicest stories that I've told and repeated, and now I'm hearing lots and hundreds of people repeating it, is the Taylor Swift story, and this what we call Swift quakes. So I was involved in a fracking project in the US, and we made such little noise with our fractures that we couldn't tell where the fractures were, which is what we needed to know. So we had a microseismic array, and it was so quiet we can't even hear what our own fractures are, which really annoyed us. Those fractures were sub 1.5 on the Richter scale. Taylor Swift's concert in Seattle produced a seismic event of 2.3 on the Richter scale. So we really need to reduce the worry in the public, and that's going to be stakeholder engagement at a local level, at a regional level, at a government level, and get the public are not daft. Yeah, get out there and help them understand that this is good for them, not bad for them, and done in a professional, scientific way. I think it will get to the point where we realize after a few pilot projects that are very, very quiet, we move the continent to a place that it needs to be. Alessia?
Well, you gave a very comprehensive answer, so I don't have much to add. I will say that it would be useful when we look not only at geothermal but at other technology to kind of draw the sun and making sure that we are engaging the different community quite early in the project to make sure that it doesn't show up at a moment where things are already advancing and prevent it. A lot of the time, what is really missing is just information. There is a very broad support among the EU population to decarbonize. So if people understand better what are the different roles of technology in this kind of decarbonization pathway, but also what are the risks, the actual risk, and what can be done to minimize them. But also if we
Exactly.
explain a little bit better the benefit for the different community, what will be then the benefit for the industry around in terms of energy cost and the energy like reliability, what would be potential job, what would be the kind of scheme that can be put into place on the skill side to make sure that we are reskilling people. This can also be very helpful in bringing the awareness and the support that is needed to decarbonize geothermal, as it is the topic discussed today, but also other clean technology.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alessia. And thank you so much, Tony. I see that we are at the top of the hour. So I guess we'll wrap this up here, but our events team did put a message in the chat. So just pointing out to everyone that you will see a survey appear on your screen as you leave the webinar. We love to hear any additional feedback that you have. And I know we did not get to everyone's questions in the chat or the Q&A. But if you do still have a question that you'd really like an answer to, we are happy to take them via email at events@catf.us. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Greatly appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week and upcoming weekend.
Thank you.